What's up? Coming at you from a different perspective because I didn't feel like moving the webcam to its usual position. But either way, this I wanted to make a relatively short kind of response because Billy he released a video and he mentioned part of a response to my other video I was responding in, but just one note that wasn't related to that, but yeah, you mentioned that your one buddy, uh, talking like towards the camera, but I should probably talk towards the mic. You mentioned here about your one buddy, and that is a pretty. I mean, I guess he's a guy who has a pretty large responsibility within his wing of of whatever the navy or the military. Uh, and he has like probably like a small town worth of people under his technically quote unquote, not even his authority, whatever, his responsibility, with probably I would imagine like some kind of aircraft carrier or something. um but you said like he doesn't even seem to understand the concept of like companies just being company or whatever, jobs, I guess you could say, jobs not being like a job or whatever, like jobs not hiring, but companies hiring, people hiring, kind of entities hiring, not the you're not being hired by a job, you're being hired by a company to provide some kind of utility or service to that company for their own goals, for its or for their or its own goals. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's not surprising at all that I mean, yeah, so many people are like this where they have like no understanding at all about these kind of things. It's probably more the default of people generally in society are like this, ignorant about this kind of stuff or oblivious to this kind of stuff. But like, especially somebody in the military, like, I mean, from what I've heard and what I've observed, not personally, but from what I've observed from other people, as is usually the case with me, yeah, the military, the people that have gone through the military, it's like basically a second level of it's almost, it's similar to people that go from um the primary school education in the U.S. system to college. It's like a kind of, it's like a similar point to that. It's like from going from high school to college, from going to high school to the military system. It's like both different, two branches or two levels, kind of like two sections of the government kind of like brainwashing and control machine or whatever, like taking mind control machine in a way. um like people that get into the military, they become, they start, like, to some extent they start getting taken care of by the government through that career path, whatever you want to call that. They essentially like become dependent on the government, just like almost in the same way that these people say on like welfare and shit get dependent on the government in a way. So they're not that different. Like it might sound completely different, but to me at least, from what I've the things that I've kind of come to conclude is like they're really not that different from each other in some ways. It's still this like reliant dependence on the government, and they get mashed into their head even more so than anything. The sort of like respecting of these supposed authority figures, that being their stuff like their immediate hierarchy that they've been taught about the military, and the next person up in the ranks that they're supposedly supposed to answer to and be beholden to. And then the at the end of that, they have like the ethereal like figure that's supposed to be the not the owner of the military, whatever, but the person who runs it and everything, the highest authority. Um, but that they would never personally see or whatever. But then they would just be like, well, technically that's how it works. Um, so yeah, not surprisingly at all that guy, especially that you're talking about, somebody in the military, has no clue about that entire system. How it actually works, like the fact that these companies are entities that are like ran by somebody at the end of the day, not some like magical mystical authority figure or whatever. And I've worked with people that in the one company I worked for at Amazon, it was like they mostly hired people that were like ex-military or something like that. And from my experience, there was probably less of them that were actually extraordinary people. Like it was about average. Not like just how, like, in your average, if you took 10 people off the street or whatever, or 50 people off the street, you'd probably get about the same proportion of people that are actually like you'd consider extraordinary and like good workers or good people or whatever. It'd be like the same proportions of those people that also happen to have gone to the military. Probably the same fucking like stats, same like statistics. I would say. But maybe on the military side, there's on the negatives and positive, there might be more on the extreme ends, possibly. Like, from my experience, there's a lot of people that were in the military that were assholes, lazy assholes too. But then there was a few people in there that were extraordinary, like harder workers, cool guys, and everything. But basically, I'd see like the same stuff from just the average people on the street kind of shit, like 50 people you took out of a random crowd. Yeah, so me, like, from what I've seen, there's like nothing particularly special about people that have been in the military, and you shouldn't expect any like additional understanding about any way that this place works. If anything, you should expect just as much brainwashing as if they went like to a 4-year college or some shit. Just a different flavor of that. That went on longer than it should have. But the next thing that you mentioned specifically was uh God damn it. Oh yeah, you're talking about how it's not like I don't know why my voice is slightly hoarse. I mean, it's kind of late, and I guess I wasn't expecting to make this thing at all, but my voice for some reason is kind of hoarse. But uh you mentioned the fact that companies, in a lot of cases, in many cases, people have these that start these companies, have these their own businesses and stuff. They not infrequently will have side gigs or whatever, like side hustles and stuff. Just take your example that you had, the guy that was the had the Porta John like company or whatever, and then he sold it to somebody else for a profit because he probably bought it from somebody else, and then he made a little bit of money off of that, but then he decided to sell it for a profit. It was like whatever. And I remember, I mean, I was aware of that thing, but it is interesting if it is more common than I would have expected for people to do that. Especially if they actually do make a profit often doing that. But yeah, I remember when I was in my one job that I worked at, it wasn't my first job technically, but it was one of my first jobs. When I worked at this warehouse, this cosmetics warehouse, L'Oreal warehouse, factory, whatever you want to say. One of the maintenance guys that I worked with, we were just like talking about something we were just talking about something, and somehow it got brought up that he used to own a truck, like he used to be an independent trucker or whatever. I don't know what they call that. Yeah, I guess independent trucker. Guy who owned a truck, and he got hired by other people to move their shit with his truck. But he did, he technically had his own company. He wasn't like directly working for some other company that owned the truck, and then he just drove it. He actually owned the truck under his own company name and stuff. But he said that eventually he sold his that truck company. I don't know if he sold the truck too, or if he just sold the company name and everything and the brand. But he supposedly sold it for like $1 million, and then he got out of that industry, I guess. Uh, the kind of interesting that he'd be deciding to work as a maintenance guy at some shithole company. At least to me, it was a shithole company. Uh, but yeah, like so he did that, and that was an interesting thing to hear about. I guess when I was younger and stuff, but so I've heard from people that have done that and stuff. But this is more of a this is more of like once again one of those kind of hypothetical, maybe like rhetorical questions, kind of. But uh, you know, well, you have to wonder. You have to wonder what is like the consequences of doing that frequently or whatever, or people that do that frequently enough, or just the fact like that if that happens so frequently where people make a company, make a company, um, make a brand, and then eventually that brand gets big enough, or that company gets big enough where it is seen as a potentially it is seen as a potential investment for somebody else to buy it, and then try to use that leverage that they have of the company name, what the company initially started as, using that brand and that company name and that goodwill, I guess you could say, that good reputation potentially that it had, to some extent. I would imagine in a lot of cases they probably buy the equipment that the company owned as well, not just the company name. Maybe in some cases they don't, but they probably also buy the assets like the equipment, like certain things like that, possibly buildings if they owned any, whatever. Um, but after a point, what's the consequence of that? Where these companies become almost like they almost come like uh in like if this company was a person, a company is an entity, whatever. Technically an LLC is an entity, a legal entity, just like a person with their first name caps, her first name caps, last name caps, is a legal entity as well. But a company is the same kind of thing. It's just not a physical person. It is just a idea or whatever. Um, let's say that a person was doing something kind of similar, and we might equate that to something like a prostitute or a whore or whatever, like somebody who is just freely giving away their body to everybody, or just gives their body away to everybody. They become seen as uncouth or whatever. Like they become seen as like dirty to some respects. From the fact that they're so loose with their body, they give it away so easily to other people, or to other people or whatever. Now, you'd have to almost imagine in the same way with a company or corporate entity, that it would kind of be a similar thing, where if it keeps trading hands, if it keeps getting traded, and handed off to other, it keeps getting handed around and sold, there would be some consequence to that, if you know what I mean. Like, let's say in the example of that guy with his trucking company. Well, when he sold the company, he most likely was no longer going to be driving the truck himself. So whoever bought that company would then either have to start doing that aspect itself, the driving it themselves as the person who bought it or whatever, or would have to hire somebody else to do that job, that part of the job. But then that aspect of that company that people used to equate with something reliable, or the service in a certain way, from the person who initially started the company, in this case, that guy. But now, the company still has the same exact name, most likely, and the same brand. It's the same company entity, but the service being provided by that company is now changed. It is now changed, permanently. Instead of being the guy being the truck driver, and most likely somebody who's actually dealing with customers directly in a certain way, and people see that, they might have liked that company because of that aspect. Now it has been bought by another company, potentially, either for that reason, to either just get rid of competition, or to potentially use the actual goodwill and reputation of that company, what that company had built, to leverage their ability to hopefully make more sales and profit after the fact. But now their service has changed fundamentally, because now, at least in that case, the working force has been changed from that company's perspective. And similar can be said from any company, I guess. Like, when stuff like mergers between companies happen, or that usually happens between much bigger companies, like say Activision and Blizzard Entertainment and shit, that happened, like all those kind of things, or Microsoft buying these companies and stuff. So does the service and the product that company initially was seen as being produced, it is now altered after being sold, and has been traded and sold off to so many different in so many different ways, or whatever. The service degrades, I would think, would usually be the case. Like, most of the time, I would say, at least, that people would say, when something like that happens, the service doesn't necessarily get better. The service usually degrades from what it originally was, which, I guess anybody can make their own conclusion from that. Like, one could say, well, that's the natural way that kind of happens. But then it's like, well, if people keep selling their companies for like profits to these bigger companies, like the monopolies in some cases, or to just other people, I mean, that there's nothing stopping that person from, after selling that company for a profit, just making another company, and then doing the same thing again, basically just starting from scratch in some ways, at least with their brand name and reputation and such. I mean, if they wanted to, they could still just call up their same customer base and say, hey, at least I imagine, just, hey, my company's now this and that, so you could still call me up if you need whatever done. But if that's not the case, then those people would possibly go back to that company that's now been sold and is now ran by somebody else or something else, and that the service rendered might be completely different, or potentially degraded or worse. And I would think eventually, the more it just switches hands, the more and more that service would likely degrade over time. So then it's kind of like, if people sell their companies so often after a point, then it kind of is like a net negative to like the entire system to an extent, the entire like structure of it, because then it's like the only people that have become the owners of these brand names and these companies that may have had used to have a good reputation, it all just degrades to crap. But then you might just say, well, those people could just start up the old companies again and then just start again. Just a just an interesting thing I wanted to bring up or note about what you said. What you said. It made me think of that. I was like, yeah, people just they do sell companies a lot, and it doesn't really matter for something like selling T-shirts as a side thing for just like as you said, like a person could sell T-shirts like $300 and then not sell them anymore. But then it's interesting to consider, well, those manufacturers for those products, like say these easy T-shirt brands, brand naming things that just sell them for like $15, but then the person putting the brand on gets like $3. Yeah, you don't have to get a huge investment to get involved with that kind of thing, and then you can just kind of stop whenever, most likely. So yeah, you're right about that. But I guess then some people might say, well, was that $300 worth the effort of setting up that entire thing? I guess in some cases, and maybe in a lot of cases it is, but maybe some people wouldn't consider it that worth their time to do that, I guess. But yeah, I don't want this to go even close to 30 minutes, and it's starting to get there. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you watch Billy, and yeah, take care.